week, we were lucky to get a chance to interview Jody Ray, an author, world traveler, and host of the Exit Strategy podcast. Exit Strategy is a podcast about geopolitics, conflict, human rights issues, and the illicit political economy. Jody also hosts an associated video exploration channel, Exit Strategy TV, where he uncovers culture, conflict, and cuisine of different off-the-beaten-path destinations, primarily focused in Africa.
During our conversation, we discussed the importance of why we should be informed citizens in the geopolitical sphere and the true meaning of offbeat travel. We loved having Jody on the show as our conversation is filled with impressive insight and thought-provoking perspectives. Make sure to check out the show notes, which features more information in regards to exit strategy and how you can support Jody's incredible work. We hope you enjoy this episode of Worldview Mirror. Jody, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know Nesh and I are very excited to have you as a guest. So thank you for your time.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on.
To get started, Jody, can you tell us a little bit about your cultural background, where you're from, and what brought you into this path of travel and creating a geopolitics podcast?
Yeah, sure. So hi, my name is Jody Ray. I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Didn't grow up there, but was born there and lived all over the United States. I spent a lot of time in my youth north of Baton Rouge in Avoyelles Parish, right before you actually get to Alexandria. Everything above that, I think probably most South Louisianians would agree that's Southern Arkansas and no longer Louisiana. Just kidding. But we were I grew up in Central Louisiana with heavy Cajun background. You can no longer hear it in my voice or in my accent unless I've had a little bit too much to drink or if I really, really try. But my accent has been globalized. I say that because that's almost always the next question is, where's your Cajun accent at? You don't sound like you're from Louisiana. But it's because I've been living all over the planet. It's just, it's gone now. But nevertheless, that's a bit of my background.
What led you to start traveling? Tell us a little bit about like what you've done professionally.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So for the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of professional writing. So I was in the private sector doing technical writing and communications consulting. But travel and just a general interest about life abroad has always been intriguing to me. I did a master's program in my early 20s in Amsterdam, so that really kicked things off. It was a 2-year program. I wound up staying in Holland for 4 years. I took up German in high school, so I lived in Germany for a couple of years. Traveled all through Europe, playing music and just traveling for fun. So that kind of set things off, I think, in my my early 20s. I'm 40 now, so I've had quite some years to explore beyond Europe, and it's been great.
Nesh and I our travel journey started in Amsterdam as well.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, we had the opportunity to backpack Europe together. So it sounds like your Euro experience gave you the travel bug, and then kind of led you in your program abroad, led you into kind of what you're interested in now. But from there, did you just continue to keep traveling, or how did you find yourself in Africa?
Most of the African countries that I've been to, that was quite recently. I did, however, I was able to travel to Kenya in 2007 as a part of international development program with the Universiteit van Amsterdam. So that really sparked interest in Africa. So during the pandemic, while we were all sitting at home, I was really interested in geopolitical events. I've always been interested in international affairs and curious about what else is happening in the world beyond just what I think traditional media can provide. So I was following along a lot of Instagrammers, following along non-traditional media about just everything from travel to geopolitics, everything abroad. And I figured, since we were all sitting at home, to make the best use of my time, why not start a podcast along some of my interests? My interests generally lie along international politics, global politics, international relations, which is what I studied in Universiteit van Amsterdam. And just so I started reaching out to experts and talking to them about conflict, warfare, current events that are happening between states. It wasn't really a travel podcast or anything. So that's kind of how Exit Strategy started, and it took off. I didn't think it would. A lot of people started listening. And then so I sat back and I was like, hey, I wonder if there is an opportunity to travel to some of these countries that I'm talking about and do some filming after this pandemic is over. I obviously didn't know that it was going to take 2 years, but it took 2 years for the pandemic to reach a fever pitch, and we were able to travel again. So right after it was that plane tickets were available and opened for international travel, I had all the time in the world to have planned a trip from West to East Africa, and then did it. So yeah, went to a few of these countries, 5 in fact. Started in Togo, drove across the border to Benin, flew to Ethiopia, then flew down to Kenya, flew over to Madagascar, back to Kenya, and back home. It was a 5.5 month long trip.
Wow.
And yeah, it was great. I was able to talk to a few experts on the ground about their country's political situation and its political situation in which it shares with its neighbors. But I also, because that's a very niche subject, I think it was important to broaden the subject area. So I also included cultural aspects of the country and cuisine. So any interesting cuisine or culinary delights that I came across. Currently, I'm sitting on all of this footage. I'm editing it now, and I'm throwing it on YouTube. I've also been writing articles for a few larger publications about some of those experiences. For example, I just had one released in the BBC World Table about buying local ingredients for gumbo and making the first gumbo, because gumbo has West African roots. So we made their version of gumbo. Country Roads magazine is a regional magazine, I think, between Louisiana and Mississippi, covering cool aspects of the Gulf South. And that story will be in their July food issue. You can see my journey through Benin's market, wearing Togolese outfit, getting okra and all this, all the stuff that they use to make gumbo. And yeah, that's just one of the many stories that I was able to cover.
So you got to tell me, what kind of gumbo did you make? Something
So,
with seafood or what?
Well, yeah. So their gumbo is just okra stew. But it's most of the same ingredients that we use in Louisiana, except they don't use a roux. They overdo it on purpose with the okra. So the okra actually makes this sort of green, slimy consistency that binds everything together. But yes, everything was inside that you would normally find in a traditional Louisiana gumbo: seafood, fish, crab meat, shrimp. All of the great peppers and spices. They do include tomatoes. They also include this great, it's not halloumi, but it's a hardened cheese. They fry cheese, and they add cubes of this hard cheese. Yeah, so everything, the okra, cooks down, but they use so much of it, it creates this sort of, I don't know. I don't want to say ooze, but that's kind of what it looks like, because it holds all the ingredients together, because you eat it with your hands. There's no rice. Our carbohydrate in Louisiana is rice, obviously, but yeah, theirs is fufu. There's like sort of cassava made potato mash, and you basically take it with your fingers and you draw all the ingredients out and eat it by hand. So a little bit different, but that's where it started. So okra is an African vegetable, and that was brought over to the New World, to the Western Hemisphere, along the transatlantic slave trade. Our Louisiana gumbo is nothing more than a syncretic dish. It's part West African, part French, and part Native American, because we add filet and sassafras, which is Native American.
I'm going to jump back to your
Sure.
podcast, Exit Strategy.
Sure.
So why geopolitics? I think there is a lot of travel content out there, but there's not a ton of travel content that focuses on geopolitics. I think it's a very interesting subject, but it's also a very daunting subject for a lot of people.
We have this notion that, if it's not happening in our backyard, it doesn't
Sure.
concern us, and it's very easy to turn a blind eye. So why, in your opinion, why do you think it's important for, not just travelers, but, all of us to pay attention to geopolitics and follow these current events, human rights, illicit trade, all of this? Like, why is that important to learn about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different answers. I mean, at the very basic, it's just to be smarter about the planet. It's just to know more about the planet. But for me, one of the reasons was, right before the pandemic, I traveled to Ethiopia, and this was months before the first shots were fired. That was inevitably going to turn into the Tigray crisis. This was the largest humanitarian crisis outside of Yemen in the 21st century, and most people don't know about it and still don't know about it. So I think 3 or 4 episodes of Exit Strategy was dedicated to talking with experts to find out the background, to try to understand the complexities that gave way to a situation in which travelers could no longer even get into Ethiopia. I have friends there that I wasn't able to see, and who cares about me? Consider the families and stuff that were displaced because of this atrocity that occurred. And there was very little news coverage, I think, in traditional media, traditional American media, very little news coverage over it. I mean, you got some here and there, but you really don't get a lot of international news in the States. And of the international news that you get, almost none of it is about Africa. There are different reasons for that, but nevertheless. So Exit Strategy was just kind of a way for me to explore those topics, and I think probably just make an informative content for people to know about some of these places that people don't often travel to, and places that people might be unfamiliar with.
Ash and I originally for this podcast, I think our main intent was we really wanted to focus on culture, right? I wouldn't call myself a political person, and I mean, I don't know about you, Ash, but I feel like it's almost impossible, right, to separate politics from culture. I came across this quote on social media. I think, I can't remember who it was by, but it said, in the age of information, ignorance is a choice. It is super relevant, right, in the world that we live in today. And it's not we're not just living in the age of information, we're living in the age of globalization. Sure. Where we're all intertwined some way or another. Everything we do is political, right? From what we eat to what we wear to where we source our products. Everything is political. That's another element that not a lot of people see or maybe don't want to acknowledge. I do think that since these issues can be very, like I mentioned, daunting, very big, right, very heavy, it is really cool to find content like yours that really grounds things for people and helps them understand in a very straightforward and easily digestible way, right? I did want to ask you, so what have you learned from, doing this podcast personally and professionally?
Yeah, no, great question. And I appreciate that quote. I think I've seen the same one. It kind of reminded me of a quote Ralph Nader said many years ago when he was running for president. He said, if you're not turned on to politics, politics will turn on you. Often when I research some of these countries, I look at Instagram and social media, and I see who the major influencers are. And sometimes they happen to be Western influencers. For example, I saw an Instagram influencer travel to Ethiopia before I went, and they're taking selfies next to these old Italian cars in the north of Ethiopia and Eritrea. You're wondering, why are there Italian cars in backyard of Africa? Well, if you dig a little bit deeper, you begin to notice all sorts of interesting Italian influences that are happening in this part of the world. The oldest Italian restaurant in Africa is located in Addis Ababa, the capital. Then you begin to understand that the largest marketplace in Ethiopia is called Mercato and Piazza. These are Italian words. All of these Italian influences are in the country. Then you take you peel the onion back even more and realize that, oh, look at the history of colonization. The Italians tried to colonize Ethiopia twice and failed 2 times. They had the audacity to try again. And now Ethiopia, along with Liberia, is the only country on the African continent that was never colonized by European powers, but it has all of these leftover Italian influences. And that's just like history and geopolitics right there. You can make small pieces of content around that. I mean, that was sort of the stuff that really intrigued me. So everywhere I went, I tried to look for anomalies or odd things that stuck out. My interests lie in kind of going to off the beaten track places, and then finding the even more weird things within those places and trying to provide some explanation or some interesting context around those.
I love that. I think shedding light on rural communities or places that haven't really got so much exposure is really important. That's what I've tried to do through my company, through Teletour, and through other avenues. And what Nesh and I are trying to accomplish with this podcast is really just raising cultural awareness. So it sounds like COVID was the catalyst for exit strategy, but was there a particular, or maybe the conflict going on in Ethiopia, that really stuck with you? Or like, what would you say was a first that you really wanted to find out more about?
Right. Well, so because of COVID, I had to choose the countries that I was going to go on this trip very carefully because, for example, I wanted to start in Ghana, but Ghana wasn't allowing people to travel out of the country and into neighboring states because of the COVID rules at the time. So I had to find a country that would allow me to leave and enter into another neighboring country with very little problem. The only, at the time, April, this was April of last year, that was Togo and Benin. Togo was fascinating to me because it has this huge voodoo culture. Again, another artifact we're familiar with here in New Orleans. But all of voodoo was West African, brought over to Haiti, brought over to the Caribbean, did make its way to New Orleans as well. But that was very intriguing. So I was able to get into Togo, and with a couple of hiccups, was able to be involved in and film a few voodoo ceremonies. Those will also be on the YouTube channel. Coming out quite soon. So I was able to get to Togo and then travel into Benin. Benin is kind of where we got, there was some more voodoo there as well. Voodoo is kind of dispersed throughout West Africa. So you can find different versions and ceremonies from different practitioners around the region. And then from there, flew to Ethiopia. The war at that time had calmed down, but they were very, very skeptical of Westerners, especially Americans with a camera, looking for stories. They wanted to make sure that you did get the correct journalist visas if necessary, but they were very, very skeptical. It was, again, a horrible war that still to this day rages on in pockets, but adversely affected millions of people. And the government put a very tight clamp on who could travel there. So they were using COVID as a way to pick and choose who they let into the country, more or less.
I think a lot of people, especially first-time travelers, they focus on all of these like very mainstream destinations. A lot of people, I don't want to say they stay away from Africa, but it's not maybe top of mind or, one of the first places that they think of to go travel. What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about some of these countries?
Yeah, no, great question. I think for Americans, I could be wrong here. I'd actually like to see some data on this to check myself if I'm correct. But I imagine that for Americans, most people that are going to Africa are either African Americans who are trying to get a more vivid understanding of their roots, and then probably also like international business. So for the common traveler, I think you're right. There are a lot of people don't look to Africa or many African countries as leisurely travel destinations. But yeah, you are correct. There are many misconceptions. I think people sometimes, I've come across this in the States. People do incorrectly see Africa, or they speak about Africa as this one giant monolith, and it certainly isn't. Every single country is wildly different from the other. It has more biodiversity, more racial diversity than any other place on the planet. People are shocked to see that it's not constantly at war. Often the stories we hear about are rough stories about immense poverty or ongoing conflict. Those things do exist, but they're certainly not the things that should be associated with immediately when it comes to the African continent. I know people are, when I showed pictures to family members, they were shocked that we were in cities with giant skyscrapers and huge rail and public transit infrastructure. They were very shocked to see that. I think a lot of people immediately probably think it's dangerous, but it's no more dangerous from a season. As a seasoned traveler, it's never been any more dangerous than anywhere else I've ever been. You just have to be kind of, you certainly have to be cautious where you go. And of course, all of these things are going to differ based on your personal attitude and how you manage to get around yourself. If you're not a cautious person, you'll probably have more problems.
I think that goes for anywhere speaking. You have to be conscious of your surrounding. I think that's very interesting to your point that when people consider Africa, they kind of consider the continent as a whole and as all one country. I think people do the same thing in South America as well.
Sure.
Kind of assume that all Latino countries are very similar, even though they're extremely diverse. From your travels and this recent trip to Africa, or what is something that you've learned or carry with you?
It was a sensory overload because we were traveling. We had to cover a lot in 5 months. 5.5 months sounds like a long time to be out traveling, and I guess in for most people that is a long time. But considering that we covered, I say we, for half of this trip, I shout out to my colleague, Benjamin Dome. He's a photojournalist from the UK. He's also, was also covering a lot of this stuff alongside me. He's got his own YouTube channel that I can provide you for the show notes, but that's what I mean when we say we. There were so many experiences in each of these countries that were fantastic. I mean, the one that sticks out to me the most, I think, is my multiple trips to Ethiopia. I've been to that country more than any other on the African continent, and it was primarily with Ben. He has connections and friends in the Mercy tribe. But this is an indigenous tribe in the south of the country. Very difficult place to get to. The tribe and that group of people numbers around 10,000. You'll probably vaguely recognize them as the tribe that where the females carry large plates in their lips. There's only two tribes in East Africa that do that, the Surma and the Mercy. So because of our repeated returns to visit the Mercy, we inevitably made friends. They remember us. We learn words and we are able to communicate. They love to drink and distill their own moonshine, often to their detriment. But it's great to sit around and have moonshine and camp along with them in next to their huts. This was very off the beaten path sort of thing, miles and miles from civilization, with multiple modes of transportation to be able to get to their land. We have friends now. We keep in touch with them when we can, when they can get to a city and they tap up their phone. They're very curious about Ben and I and where we are and when we're coming back. But yeah, I mean, that one certainly sticks out. And, these are semi-nomadic cattle farmers who are also how should I refer to it? They're very skeptical of outsiders, and they're often referred to as the most dangerous tribe in Africa. It's a little bit of a hyperbole, but they're all armed. They are certainly dangerous, and because they're skeptical of outsiders and drunk on moonshine, it can make for a very unsafe predicament. But again, you handle yourself well and make a few jokes and do some sign language and some charades and bring gifts. That goes a long way. And we've been able to return. And my time with the Mercy, this was my third time. This last trip has been nothing short of extraordinary. Yeah, a lot of that footage again will be up on my YouTube channel imminently. I'm going to try to release these videos in the order in which I encountered them. So it'll be like Togo and Benin, the voodoo and the gumbo first, and then we'll do a big deep dive into Ethiopia. But yeah.
And Jody, who made that initial introduction to the Mercy tribe?
Yeah, good question. So Ben's uncle is Dr. David Turton. He is now retired, but he was the Dean of African Studies at the University of Oxford. And he initially went as an anthropologist in the 60s and
Wow.
stayed with them for about 10 years by invitation. He didn't discover them. They were discovered much early on, probably by those Italians that tried to take the country over and failed. But probably missionaries too. I bet probably back in the 1800s, I bet they were there were probably Western missionaries or something like that. But Dr. David Turton is the foremost expert on the Mersey. He helped translate their language into a written dictionary. He's done a lot. So you can go to mercy.org if you're interested in learning more about this tribe and what David's work, Dr. Turton's work is. It's mursi.org, and you can get a whole slew of information about the origins of this tribe and who this group of people is, and the problem with even calling them a tribe, and all of this critical, fantastic academic information.
What are some of the recommendations that you would give to somebody who, would like to travel rural Ethiopia?
Rural Ethiopia, or just rural in general? I mean, well, I guess it doesn't even matter.
In general, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, heavy research is always good. I mean, research heavily before you go. And know when you want to travel. So for example, in Togo, they have this huge voodoo festival and ceremony that happens in January that almost nobody knows about. And it's like the entire country shuts down, the main city shut down, because they're all celebrating this fantastic cultural aspect of Togolese life. And had I known that, that would have been something that I would have loved to have filmed. We just missed it, unfortunately, but now we know. But that's a perfect example of a situation in which heavy research about when to go is great. If you could find a country's festival season, or when something unusual happens, that would be great, because it's not going to be fun if you just say, I want to go to Togo, and then you show up and you're like, okay, well, what's now what? I have to go to TripAdvisor and find the best 10 things to do. And that's no. So research heavy, that's the big one. Hire local guides to help you with language barriers. There is somebody who speaks your language in all of these countries, whether you're German, French, whatever the colonial languages. So for Togo and Benin, French is the national language. My French is terrible, but if you try a little bit, it goes a long way. But you can also hire local guides, and you can find them usually on Instagram. You can find them on a variety of travel sites. There's a lot of local partnerships that can put you in touch with a guide that's not expensive, who can shadow you for part of the day or all of the day and help you find whatever you would ever need in any of these countries. Eat the local food. Stay away from all the food in your hotel, especially if it's a big corporate hotel. Don't eat that food. Eat the local food. But also, if you're eating the local food, be careful of anything that's made with local water. That's through most of the African continent, that can get a little sticky for Western stomachs. We had our problems in Togo, but we were eating roadside fufu made with local water. So, it's just one of those things. Immerse yourself, drink with the locals, but don't get drunk. Watch your wallet and phone, but that's no matter where you are. We have a problem with that in the French Quarter. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to be seen as an ignorant American. The best part of traveling is so you remedy that. Locals are more than happy and more than pleased to share with you everything about the places that they live in. When I was talking about the cooking gumbo, we were going to get the ingredients and just try to pull that off in our Airbnb hotel room till we met a guide in the market who was like, my mom cooks this like every week. Why don't you just come to my house? Like, you buy all the ingredients and just let's cook it. So now we found ourselves in this little neighborhood. We didn't know these wonderful people who had invited us into their home. They were local citizens, and the mom couldn't speak any English. Our French was sort of bad, so we were doing what we could to figure it out, and we helped her chop and prepare everything, cooked everything outside. Families came around wondering who the white foreigners were in town, what the heck was going on, and we had this beautiful, wonderful gumbo with this whole new family that we now keep in touch with. I mean, that's the sort of experiences you want if you really want to do solid immersive travel. It's not enough to buy a ticket and go to a hotel room and eat the eat the fancy fine dining that's overpriced anyway. It might be comfortable, it might be easy, but you're not going to get anything out of it. You can't be afraid to go outside and talk to people. And like I said, just drink but don't get drunk, eat but don't overstay, help do the dishes at the end,
Okay, so Jody, I want to dive more in about the Mercy tribe because I'm fascinated about this. But what are some of your biggest takeaways about their daily life?
They wake up and they spend the day tending to large pieces of land that are growing sorghum or corn. That's basically the staple of their diet. They also each have hundreds and hundreds of cattle that they herd and try to find water. And basically where they stay is it has to change based on the climate, where water sources are. And sometimes that can get a little sticky because they are buttressed against like 14 or 17 other tribes that are different from them, but they all sort of behave in the same way, as in they also are cattle herders or are living off the land in some way. And sometimes there are territorial disputes that causes conflict that you would never hear about in any kind of media. Nobody covers what indigenous tribes are warring at in Western media. You only get the stuff that governments partake in. So it was a little bit dangerous for us because there were some moments where there were issues, political issues between tribes, and these guys are all carrying AK-47s around and ready to defend their territory at the drop of a hat. But when things were calmer, we were able to go on a few warthog hunts with them. They also hunt for bees because they really like honey. So they try to harvest. They create bee traps and they set them out around the outskirts of their land, and they attempt to climb trees and very gently get honeycombs out. That's also used in the food. Again, they also love moonshine. So getting moonshine back into the tribal areas with them and partaking with moonshine with them over a fire at night is very fun. It took them, they're very skeptical of outsiders. So they're not, plus there's the language barrier. So they're very reticent or hesitant to speak in depth with you. But after they started recognizing Ben and I, Ben has been there many more times than I have, but they certainly recognized me and eventually gave me a Mercy name, and we were drinking moonshine at night. They really wanted to hear Western music. So I had downloaded just a bunch of just different hits that we'd have, like Rolling Stones, and just a whole variety of different songs. And they were very interested in hearing what kind of music we listen to in the States. And one of them that I remember, that just as a brief anecdote, fell in love with Gangnam Style. He learned the words. This is also, if you go to my YouTube channel, it's on one of my shorts. We taught him the dance, the horse dance, and I mean, he was so happy. And this is a fierce warrior hunter who won't he won't let you see him smile. He can't show emotion. He's a stoic, fierce warrior who defends his territory from external threats. And then you give him a little bit of moonshine and this guy's singing Gangnam Style. We're doing the horse dance at night over a fire. I don't think there's anybody else in the world who could say that they've done this in rural Africa, listening to a South Korean pop hit with an indigenous tribe. But I mean, that's just one of the anecdotes that stuck out. But even the next day, after we were all hungover and everything, and we were on a hunt, he was in our car in the front, and he turned around and he tapped me on my knee, and he goes, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa," doing this. He loved it. He couldn't get enough.
What I'm hearing for that is, no matter if you're living in rural Africa or in the States, we're more alike than we are different, right? We all appreciate
Absolutely.
music. We all appreciate. That's incredible. So what was your tribal Mercy name?
Kulian Mokoni. It means short drummer of the land, because I think that's why they were asking me about like what kind of music I was into. They played drums at night on these large jerry cans that they load water and moonshine in, and when they get empty, they're all playing drums on these jerry cans. And I was playing very Western style beats, 4/4, where they're more theirs sounded more like slower, almost Native American drums. And so they were like, look at this this crazy white man on drinking moonshine and playing drums on our jerry can. So they gave me short drummer of the land. I'm not a tall man, so they recognized that immediately. They are tall people, and yeah.
We are asking all of our guests on the show some rapid fire questions. What is one thing that you do not travel without?
One thing that I don't travel without. I mean, this might not be for everybody, but I try to capture as much as I possibly can. So for me, it's at the very least a GoPro, external batteries, external hard drive, because I'm trying to capture all of these wonderful anecdotes that I'm sharing with you today on film, so that I could share them with the rest of the world on YouTube.
Who is one of your travel inspirations?
Yeah, so I really loved reading war correspondence. So these aren't necessarily traditional travelers. They would travel to cover wars, but I find that their adventures and discoveries working for a variety of news agencies and what they discovered, I think are really, really fascinating. So I know it's not the traditional type of travel that you might be talking about, but I really loved, I still do, Anthony Lloyd, Michael Hare. He did a bunch of stuff with Vietnam. Nia Rosen, the late Marie Colvin, for anyone interested. She passed away not too recently, but she lost an eye, has been shot several times covering the atrocities in Syria, none of which we would have ever known about if it wasn't for the work of this brilliant woman. You know, also shout out to Popular Front. If you're interested in conflict, or you're interested in seeing some of the more underreported class demonstrations or just conflicts from around the world, Jake Hanrahan was a former Vice reporter. He was also on the Exit Strategy podcast. You can go back and listen to my interview with him. But he is the founder of Popular Front. Popular Front's really great if you're interested in that sort of thing. There's a whole slew of underpaid journalists who are covering conflicts like this. So I would like to do the same thing. But it's difficult for me because I'm not backed by any large major news organization. Also, large major news organizations are not funding this sort of thing anymore. It's incredibly expensive. The insurance costs are very high. It's dangerous. They don't fund these types of projects anymore, especially now that Vice has gone bankrupt. There's a huge void. There's a huge vacuum in the marketplace for international coverage of atrocities, conflicts, humanitarian issues. And that's a really, really terrible thing, because as if we didn't have access to that information. Now it's even hard. It's going to be even harder to get unless you're really paying attention to small niche international news outlets, or I don't want to brag, but small media like myself. I'm trying to cover more of the stuff, and I'm just starting to grow. I'm very new now, so some of these are great ones to follow, and they are certainly people who inspire me to continue to go out and do what I can to discover more about what I call the 3 C's: the culture, the conflict, and the cuisine.
It is so sad that there's not more efforts like this, or that it's so hard to find funding and, adequate resources for the type of work you're doing. So hopefully we can be a help in that regard, and, more exposure, because it's really important work what you're doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
What are some of the other ways that you personally think some everyday person can help and can contribute to improving these things?
Well, just to stay informed, I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube. I don't mean to say that it's impossible, but it is becoming more difficult. For those listeners 18 and older, you can find a lot of stuff on social media, on Instagram. If you follow international photographers, follow my podcast. I'm always interviewing conflict journalists who will tell you how to find them on Instagram or TikTok, or even posting stuff on Reddit and a variety of other places. There are informal news agencies that are trying to highlight some of the lesser known topics in international political economy where people just don't know what's going on. For example, there's a really nasty internal conflict right now that's displacing many people in Myanmar. Most people don't know about it. There's a lot of guys from Atlas News to Rose Warfare on Instagram that they do what they can to cover what's happening. Also, the Turkish strikes against the YPG, the Kurdish militia that the United States is allied with in Kurdistan. A lot of that is you could find a ton of content on Instagram if you just type in some of those keywords. Those help. Don't consume commercial media. So turn off Fox News, turn off MSNBC. They're never going to cover this stuff. What you want to read is like Reuters or Agence France Press. The German ones, Deutsche Welle, they'll cover some of this stuff. BBC World will cover some of this stuff. But the commercial media in the United States is so horrible. Just turn it off. Don't give them any more ratings. They're the worst.
For me and Nesh and I, when we were prepping for your episode and to interview you, it was so sad that my only impression of Africa, and for a long time, obviously growing up, was just that and I think you mentioned it, that it was just a very impoverished area, and no one ever shows. Obviously, in any country, there's the good and the bad, but I felt like I never saw anything besides that, especially speaking about Africa.
Yeah, I mean, we grow up here in the States with those commercials of like Save the Children, where you just see like these starving kids running around or not running around, crawling around, and these churches trying to raise money. And look, those places do certainly exist. There are conflicts that rage in a variety of places, and internally displaced people, IDP camps, do exist on the continent. These are things we should be paying attention about, but we have to be nuanced in our understanding in that it's not everywhere and it's not the majority of the time. And you can go to a place like Benin and go buy ingredients for gumbo and make it with the family, and not see a shred of abject poverty at all. You can go to Togo and participate in a voodoo ceremony. You can go to South Africa and go on an ethical safari. You can go to Mozambique and see the Portuguese influence, the only side of Eastern Africa where you see these beautiful Portuguese churches and the leftover remnants from their time colonizing the country. Amazing beaches where people are snorkeling and diving safely with marine fauna.
We got a few more fun questions for you.
Okay.
So, who is one of the coolest person or that you've met while traveling, or group of people?
Yeah, so I thought about this question long and hard, and the very first thing that came up in my mind was this young street kid that I met in 2019. He was this kid running around. His name is Emmanuel, and he was running around in the south of Ethiopia, probably about 3 or 4 hours in a small city, basically the last destination, the last point of civilization before you would drive off into tribal land. So he was living in this small village named Jinka, and he kept showing up when Ben and I were out eating somewhere, or he would show up at our hotel in the morning, wanting to see when we were up. His English was pretty good. He wanted to practice. He was a scrappy young kid, and full of smiles and jokes and stuff. And Ben and I would buy him snacks and soda. These are delicacies that are not really affordable for the local youth, unfortunately. So he very much, and he appreciated that. And in return, he would help us with Amharic. We don't speak Amharic, the Ethiopian national language of Ethiopia. And he would help us not get, ripped off when we needed to rent a 4x4 to get into Mercyland. Or he would help us, plan a long stay at a hotel or something when the desk staff might not have been able to communicate with us in English. So we've kept in touch over the years, and we've been able to get him into a decent school, and now we send to other foreigners who are interested in seeing some of the indigenous tribes down there to Emmanuel. So now he's got like this sort of small little business that he runs while going to school, and he helps people get around, and that benefits him and his family. And it was quite interesting because I saw him this last time we went, and he turned up, and now he's 18. He's taller than I am now. I remember when I used to be able to pick him up, but he's now a tall grown man now, and he's running this little business and stuff. So he's been cool. He's kept in touch with us on WhatsApp over the years. We probably talk once every couple of weeks, find out how things are going. He's a regular kid like anyone else. He's super smart, really annoying. He's obsessed with TikTok. He's been a great colleague and friend, and he's got his own little tour company set up now. So he's doing well, and he's always somebody I'll remember and that I'll continue to visit as I go back.
Okay, so maybe my favorite of your 3 C's, we got to touch on the cuisine. What is one of your favorite street foods you've had while traveling?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest question here. I like to eat. So it's hard. I can't really choose a favorite. Togo had these, and I can't recall the name, but they had these great sausage skewers that they would pull off into big loaves of French bread. And it almost made like sort of like a sausage po' boy, very similar to a sausage po' boy that you might find here in New Orleans. Although the sausage was more well done, thankfully, I think for my stomach, but also just smaller. But they would cover it in these onions and this sort of like mango hot sauce. But it was really, really fantastic. Beef tibs in Ethiopia. This is a Ethiopian staple dish. It comes on your table in a small oven, and there's a fire at the bottom, and all these little shards of beef and jalapeno are stuck at the top, and they're sizzling, and you eat that with injera bread. And then probably Ranopango in Madagascar. Ranopango is I guess it's burnt rice water. It's kind of like a tea. So whenever rice is finished cooking in the pot and there's the bottom of it has become burnt and crispy, they take the residue and boil water in it. And it sounds kind of bad, but it actually makes this really interesting sort of sweet, because of the sugar in the rice, sort of tea. And it's basically like, it's just burnt rice water. They call it Ranopango, and you can get it everywhere. They were startled when I, as a white guy, came in and asked for Ranopango. They were like, "What?" They would get family members out from the back and go, "Say it again. Say it again. What do you want?" Ranopango.
Well, Jody, thank you so much for coming on and spending your time. I know Nesh and I have a million more questions, and we could probably go on for hours talking about your work, because you're doing amazing stuff. So
thank you very much. I'm happy to come on again in the future. If you want me to talk about one specific country in more detail, I'm happy to do that. But until then, everybody can find my stuff on YouTube, youtube.com/@exitstrategytv. And then if you want to follow me on Instagram, I throw some stuff up there when I can. That's @exitstrategy.tv. And I'll give you all that stuff in the show notes. But I appreciate you having me on. That's so nice.
Yeah.
And it's always a great pleasure to talk with like-minded people, especially other travelers. I am now a subscriber to the Worldview Mirror podcast, and on both YouTube and Spotify. So thank you so much for doing this, and keep up the great work. I look forward very much to your upcoming guests.
I've really enjoyed talking to you today, and I know you're full of information, just awesome stuff, and have a really great perspective on the world. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and it was a pleasure meeting you both.